Hey there, and welcome to the Planner Pals podcast, a podcast hosted by two true Planner Pals. My name is Mark, or Mark Your Pages.
And I'm Jess or Jessica, and in today's episode, we're looking at our planner layout must haves, the ones that are essential in our setups, the ones we try and use time and time again, not the ones we try once and then regretfully just don't work out, the ones that are staples. We actually know that we're going to use them, and thus we keep setting them up. Before we get into it, though, just a little bit of a disclaimer because just because these are our must haves, our essentials, does not mean they have to be yours. Just because it works for us doesn't mean it's actually going to work for you. So if we're going through our list and you're like, absolutely not, there's no way I'm putting that into my planner, it's cool. You do you. These are just the ones that are for us. Also, it's probably good to note that just because they're our essentials right now doesn't mean they're going to be our essentials forever. I mean, if you asked me maybe a year or 3 years ago, my list would certainly be different. So these are probably going to change either, like, I don't know, maybe next week if my planner has its way. It's always changing. Or at least in the future, there will probably be some differences to our list. Now, in terms of actually picking what went on the list, how did you make your choices, Mark?
Well, I want to just first say I absolutely agree with you. I think the way that these work out for us, they change over time. I think for myself, that's why I really love bullet journaling, is that I can make these pages however I want, and I don't have to go out and search for one or conform to a template that already works. Not that there's anything wrong with that, of course, right? If you have a planner that has pages or pre-printed, that's great. So for me, really, it's just what I've learned about over time and have figured out. So been bullet journaling for 7 years now. And just over the time of doing this and figuring out how this works out well for me, really just focused in on what's the most functional, but also what's super fun. And because I use my bullet journal mostly for work, it's what has been kind of the best kind of productivity slash helpful tool for me to use while bullet journaling and planning for work. So that's how I figured mine out. How did you go about figuring you out?
Mine was very much thinking about like if I just started to strip back parts of my journal, like take pieces out piece by piece, what would be the kind of top five that were left over? Either for kind of like, productivity, like you said, try to make myself as organized as possible, with my scatterbrain mess that is my planner a lot of the time, but thinking about not just that, also things that just bring joy and fun, things that make me want to use my journal. Because if I don't want to use my journal, funnily enough, I'm not going to use my journal. That kind of defeats the purpose.
Yeah, mine's very also about what has helped me most remember the things that I have to remember. So as we're going through our list, some of them might sound a little bland to most people because you're like, Mark, come on now. But this has been very super helpful collection pages or spreads or things like that. I don't know, I'm just super thankful for them. So excited to go through our list. I mean, I can start off with number five for myself if you'd like, because this kind of goes into my exact thing I just said that for most people, this is probably not the most interesting page, but this is one that's been super helpful for me. So my number five page that I love and must have in all of my journals is an IT slash help desk collection page. And so what I'm doing with this is every time that I have to put a ticket into the help desk, I have a question, something's wrong. And in my job specifically with design operations, I'm usually putting in tickets or requesting new hardware or software for people. You get that little ticket number. And then sometimes, depending on the need, if it's not an immediate need, it kind of goes into the void, is what I call it. And then we never see it on the other side. And so part of my job is making sure that I check up on those. So if I put in a request for a new computer for a new associate joining my team, I want to make sure that every week or 2 weeks I can check in. And if I'm not writing down that rec number somewhere, I forget. So I have a collection page that is exactly that. I have what is the rec number or incident number? When did I get that number? So when did I put in that request? And who did I talk to? So it's kind of a collection page that, if you're calling the doctor's office or you're calling a self-service number or whatever, you want to remember that person's name. And then that way I can go ahead and set a reminder for myself and say, okay, last week I talked to Jim and here's the number. I'm going to go ahead and call the help desk and get a status on that update. This is a page that I started using maybe about 2 or 3 years ago inside of my bullet journal. And I've just been finding them super helpful versus writing them down in like your daily notes and then trying to find that page later on. It was just a lot easier for me to just have them in one single collection page and work out really well.
I don't think I've ever actually heard of that as a collection, so that's kind of interesting that it made your top five. Is this one that you've put on your channel before? Like, has there been a setup of that page on there?
I think I've set it up in some of my new bullet journal setups, but probably not with any information in there just because they're somewhat specific to people and numbers. And I have to be very careful with work anyway sometimes, but I feel like I've probably set them up before and they're pretty basic usually. I've been including it more and more over the past few years, like I said, so probably the past two or three bullet journals have included it inside of it, and it's been super helpful.
Yeah, I think that like very much the kind of thing that like we don't necessarily remember that we're gonna forget. That I know that sounds really dumb, but a lot of time, we're going about our daily lives and stuff, and you get these little tidbits of information that you think like, oh yeah, no, that's cool. I'll remember that. I don't need to write it down. But it's like the next time you're going to use that is probably like a couple of days, a couple of weeks away. So writing it down and doing future you a favor, that sounds like a really good log to have. And I think there'd be a lot of different applications for it. I think in terms of mine, my number five would have to be my 101 things list, which sounds
Ooh.
silly because like it's really just a list of 101 little goals that I want to do across each year, but it's not just a way to set goals, it's also kind of like a memory keeper. It's like what was actually important to me for each year as a whole, that I thought like this was something in particular I want to do this year specifically. I know that it's not necessarily a very achievable list of things for a lot of people. I do try and make it kind of a mix of bigger and smaller things. A lot of fun stuff goes in there though. So things like reorganizing my office is on my list this year. Things like trying a new flavor of ice cream is also on there though. So in terms of like, I don't know, time, energy input, vastly different things, but still summarized on that list to kind of bring a little bit more joy into my life. And when thinking about like, okay, well, what's going on this list of top five things? This is one of those lists that I just really love having it in a written format because it just feels a bit more personal to have it handwritten in a notebook, like a list of little goals. I don't know.
No, I think it's really awesome. I mean, to think of that many experiences to try to have within a year, for me personally, seems overwhelming. I don't know that I could necessarily do that, but I love that you have the idea because I have a very good feeling for people like me seeing something like that and have someone come up with a list kind of inspires you to do different things, right? Where you're like, well, it might not be the same exact flavor of ice cream that Jess wanted to try this year. That's actually something really cool to do. I do have a question for you because I feel like I've definitely seen you talk about these and in your videos, but I can't remember. Do you put them in any type of like categorization to experiences or just one really long list? Because for me, I feel like if it wasn't subcategoried, I'd be like, oh, going through like 100 lines of things. So how do you organize that in a way that helps you find those small goals or things?
So what I used to do is I considered my like 10 life areas effectively. So like physical health, mental health, home environment, finances, whatever else. And I try and set myself 10 mini goals or little things that I wanted to do in each of those categories. And then the 101st item is always write my list for next year.
Very good. I like that.
It's consistent. I like it. But I found that I don't like to approach goals in a way that means that every single life area needs to have the same amount of focus because I just don't think that that's realistic. Like at any given point in time, we're going to be more focused on like physical health than we are on finances, or more focused on like home environment compared to, I don't know, family connections or whatever. Not saying that they're not important, it's just that like our focus is not actually going to be equally divided between them. So I don't see the point of like forcing myself to have an equal number of things in each of the categories. So instead, what I do is that for any of the numbers that are like special numbers, I'm thinking things like my age. So this year, like 33 is celebrate my 33rd birthday because it's easy to remember that one. 11 is my favorite number, so that is always have a favorite things day, that kind of stuff. I try and just like tie it to the number more than just like ordering them, I suppose. But also it only spans two spreads, so it's not too much effort to just scan my eyes over the list. Also, I find that if you scan your eyes over the list more often, you kind of just get a feel for which kind of like task is in which general area on the page, so it doesn't bother me too much.
Question for you, as long as you've been doing this list, on average, how many do you actually accomplish within a year? Like, what's your average on those?
Yeah, I think my average is kind of close to about half, sometimes a little less, sometimes a little more. I don't really super push myself to get everything completed because I think it's a little bit unrealistic. Instead, I like to kind of use it as a summary of like, this is the stuff that you were interested in enough or like it was important enough to you that you felt the need to write it down. It also means that like at the end of the year, when I go and make my next list, I can migrate some of them over, the ones that are still important. Like I'm pretty sure I had donate blood on my list for like 5 years in a row until I kind of came to the conclusion. I'm like, girl, you're not going to do it. Like, we'll just retire it for this year and we'll come back to it when, I don't know, you feel a little bit more motivated to go out of the house and get jabbed.
It's almost like a future log. You'd put things, week after week after week, and you're finally like, okay, this isn't going to happen. Let's go ahead and plan in the future for this one. I love that idea, though. That's a really, really cool way to look at it. And like I said, I personally couldn't think of 100 things to do. I could remember the one about setting it up for next year, but I love the experiences and I love the fact that it changes year after year too. Like you said, there's certain years where maybe you're more focused on financial success than family connection, but maybe things happen throughout the year where next year you go, you know what? I lost a lot of that I was really looking forward to, or I lost a lot of me within the year. I was so focused on everyone else. Maybe this year my list gets a little bit more focused on myself. And again, another thing that I just absolutely love about customized planning, DIY planning, bullet journaling. And you could do this in any type of planner. It's not just about bullet journaling, but I love the fact that you're the one figuring that out, not someone else figuring that out for you.
Yeah. What would be your number four on your list of most important?
So this is something again that I'm using at work. This is an ongoing collection page. I set these up in every single bullet journal that I have. And so essentially, if you work at a place where you're meeting with other people consistently, I like to set up on these one-on-one pages. So I've done this both for myself as a manager and having people that have reported to me because it's easy to just turn to that page, look at what you talked about previously, and then being able to continue that note. Or if there's things that you said you wanted to achieve or for them to achieve specifically within that time frame that you've had that meeting, you can easily go back to that and you kind of have your notes ready to go. I also use these for myself with my manager because I always like to be prepared for those meetings because in my mind, and this is the way it should be, those one-on-ones, that's your time as the employee to have a conversation with your boss. So I like to have my agenda items ready to go. And as I'm going through my weeks, if there's things that pop up and say, oh, I need to talk to my boss about this, instead of writing it down somewhere random, I just go right to that collection page, my one-on-one page with my boss. I write down that bullet point or that note that I wanted to talk to them about, and I don't have to go searching for it when it comes time for that meeting with them. This has also come in really handy when I had people who reported to me if there was ever an issue where they had to be written up. If it's come to the point where I've had to write somebody up, we've had previous conversations about that topic, right? You're not getting randomly written up for no reason. So it's all documented there. So I could easily go back and say, okay, I talked to this person on this date. This is what we talked about. This was their response. And I have a lot of that. I mean, right now it's great because it's just one page I have to dedicate, but a few years ago I had about 7 reports. And so it was, 7 individual pages that I would set up on those. But always really fun to do because I would always do some like cool lettering with their names or something to make them interesting pages for myself, not just like something basic at the title. I mean, you got to have fun with it.
For sure. And I guess, is this the kind of page that you set up like one per person and like how long does that last?
So it lasts as long as the bullet journal lasts. So I was looking through some recently, and it's always funny because the people who have the most pages in the index, for the most part, tend to have the most issue, I guess. So, years ago when I had 7 direct reports, and it would be like, employee one, it would just be like one page in my index. It would be employee two. And there was like 4 pages in my index that, I had to refer back to. And I was like, oh gosh, why did I have so many? I look back and I was like, oh gosh, I remember this person. This was such a stressful time. But it's interesting too to kind of reflect on it. But everyone gets their own page. In a lot of cases, you do go a number of pages. So why I always find that index to be helpful. We talked about this in a previous episode about like those pages specifically, is that you have that continuation. And then if there's anything specific I need to take with me from a notebook when I am going into a new notebook, I'll just look back through those notes and kind of copy over anything that I need. But for the most part, it kind of ends when it ends. If there's any type of specific note, sometimes, at least in my most recent notebooks, the year has ended perfectly at the end of December, so I can go into January fresh, right? And then it just kind of works itself out. But it's the same thing with any type of collection page, is that if I needed any notes from it into a new notebook, I just copy them over there and continue those conversations.
Do you do any kind of like, I knows nothing about your job, obviously, but is there any kind of need to like use those notes in any kind of like professional review kind of like stance or anything?
Yeah. So the direct reports were definitely a space where I did that. I would actually handwrite all of my notes around individuals for those end of years. It was helpful for me to kind of gather a lot of feedback from others and take down those notes and then kind of almost write an outline in my notebook first. And I would use those one-on-one pages to bring information from and put information into and really just use them almost like a personnel file in a way. You know, if you're thinking about another analog way of doing that, it was like having a folder in a drawer for that person. It was just in my notebook instead. Like I said, it's weird now having just one page, you know, for my direct manager, but I will set them up also if I'm meeting with other people. Like I have a researcher on my team that I meet with pretty regularly, at least once a month. And I think I do have one for her in there as well. So it's just kind of one of those things where if you're meeting with someone every now and again, it might not need its dedicated page, but I've known over time or have a good indication when I'm starting those conversations. Like, yep, this is going to be reoccurring. And I think I just want to have one spot to keep all those notes. I will say for anyone who isn't using them yet or might be interested in doing those, I think the hardest part about this, though, and why it's definitely not my number one, is that I have a really hard time remembering, like if I have a task from that conversation, I have to remind myself to actually copy that task into like my weekly because I don't usually refer back to that page until I have something to write there or it's time for our meeting. So it's one of those things where I'll write it down and kind of rapid log as I'm having that conversation to have it all in one spot, but then have to remind myself if there's any actionable thing from that conversation, remember to move it over. All right, Jess, how about for yourself? What is your number 4 page?
I feel like mine's gonna sound silly now compared to yours because yours seems like so hugely functional and with like a lot of different areas that it impacts. But it's cool. It doesn't matter because your top five does not have to be my top five. It's fine. But yeah, my number four would have to be pen swatches, which I know sounds silly. Like, do we really need that to be an essential? But I kind of thought about it in terms of where would I put that information if not in my journal? And it has to be in my journal because it has to be on paper and it has to be on the kind of paper that I use in my journals. Otherwise, it's not really as functional or as helpful as it could be. So I, in my long-term collections journal, the back of the notebook, have set up all of my pen swatches for my pens. I try and do it based on the collection. So it's like I've got all the Tombos together, I've got all of the calligraphs together and each of their releases. But then what I also found really useful was putting them by color instead of by pen type. Mainly because if I'm going looking for like an orange pen, I don't want to have to flip back and forth between all of my different swatches to find the perfect orange match to whatever other materials I'm using. If I can just look at all of my orange pens together, that makes it a lot faster for one, and thus it's more helpful. So I do consider this to be an essential because if it wasn't in there, it's not like I can really store it digitally and have a good kind of impression of what the ink will actually look like. I know you have yours digitally and physically.
I was going to say, actually, you could. Last week, I just released a video over my YouTube, actually with 4 different ways to create swatch pages. And this is one that comes up a lot for me is because I do have a digital swatch that I use for my stationery. I mean, you could take a picture of your swatch and put it into a digital format. But I'm glad you said it was in your long-term collection because when you first said that, I was like, oh my gosh, I could not imagine creating a swatch page in every new notebook that I was doing. I have a test page that I like to do where the most common pens, but I love the idea. I don't know how you do it by color though, because the thought of having to pick out well, first of all, any color from any collection for me is going to be difficult. We all know this. If you don't know it, I'm partially color deficient, so colors don't always look the right way for me. But to go through and have to pluck those colors out of my collection that I have, and then potentially for them not to go back where they belong because I forgot where I pulled them from, I would have a manic little panic attack there. But I'm sure you have a system to how you're doing it. Great idea. But yeah, I was like, digital, make it digital because then it can be by creator, it can be by color, it can be by theme if you wanted to, but that isn't a whole extra step that you would have to do to make it happen. But still really appreciate it and love having it in the notebooks that you use because oh my gosh, how terrible when you go to like use a special color somewhere and you're like, oh, like that happens with inks and Archer and Olive notebooks. For me personally, I'll ink swatch on like a super nice piece of paper or notebook that's made for it. And then I go to use it in Archer and Olive and instantly it's like, I'm going to flatten out now and not be as interesting inside of here. So I really love that though, that you're like, yeah, put it in the kind of paper that I'm using so I know exactly what to expect.
Yeah, because my long-term collections journal, I've actually had three, and none of them are full. Which is already, it's just like, wait, what are you doing here? But that's because the first one I set up was in an LT 1917 because I used to be an LT 1917 fangirl. I was going to have all of my notebooks be LT 1917s, but no, I quickly found that I did not like the paper in that one. So then I moved it to a Scribbles That Matter because I'm like, okay, Scribbles That Matter is my new journal. This is going to be the one I use forever. No, now it's in an Art Olive, which makes a lot more sense.
Well, you take your time with those types of things, though.
Yeah, exactly. And it's it's not like I kind of like started in the notebook and then like switched over immediately like 2 pages in. I kept them for at least several months until I realized that this is not going to be my forever notebook. And now with my current one that I've had, oh, it's been like 4 years. Okay, oh my gosh, I don't know. This is a complete aside, but 2018 to 2024, 2024, whatever, a jumble. I cannot tell any of the years apart anymore, and I don't know if it's because I'm getting older or if it's because the world went to crud.
It's probably that the world went to crud. I think there's just a really large gap. I was looking at a lot of my stuff from that time period. It's actually, it's funny enough, that's the one I was looking at when I was going through all those notes because the person that I was having the most issue with was kind of a reflection of kind of the times, very much so. But it all just kind of melted together because I feel like so much changed and we were trying to think of new ideas and different things to do and kind of the our plans that we would go out and do went away. That stuff wasn't happening as much. So I definitely think it's a bit of the time. You're not old enough to have any major memory loss, at least not yet. When you get to
Thank
my
you.
age, it'll get there.
I've got time. I've got a little bit of time.
Yeah, you're good. You're good. You can blame it on something else.
I used to measure my time in the Art of sub boxes because then I'd know, like, this sub box came out this quarter, this sub box came out this quarter, but I don't get all of them all the time anymore. So now my metric of time is gone.
I don't even remember when they come out and they come out the same time every year. Like, thank goodness for like the Arch and all the spoiler groups because they're the ones who remind me. Somebody was like, "Isn't the September one coming out soon?" And I was like, "I think. Do we get them in September?" Oh yeah, Mark, they've come out quarterly for the past 3 years. You should know this by
Yeah,
now.
and September's usually my favorite, so I'm looking forward to seeing it, but that is a complete aside as well. So, number three, what would be your number three most essential?
All right, so my third most essential is actually something new that I did this year, which is going to be my future log calendar pages. So this sounds really weird because most people are like, Mark, a future log is a core collection page in the bullet journal method. However, what I did this year is I combined a future log and a calendar into one. And it's been really helpful for me. There are some changes that I'm going to make to it in this upcoming year because I decided this year I was going to do Monday starts and then I would have like Saturday, Sunday to like add notes to. Problem is, every time I look at this calendar, I'm thrown off because I always think Sunday is the first day of the week versus Monday. So that's going to change. But what I've really loved about this is it's kind of combined two things. One, the future log, which I find to be helpful, but I know not everyone always loves it. And a calendar because last year I was using two different notebooks to accomplish this in my bullet journal with a basic normal future log. And then I had a separate notebook, which is the Night Owl Planner that had more of a calendar type thing, like the Hobonichi kind of calendar pages in it. So I was using those together and I was like, oh gosh, like I just want to go to one thing. And so I was able to figure out how to combine those in a square notebook, which is going to be problematic because I'm thinking I'm going B5. So I'll have to figure out what that looks like in a B5 instead. But it's just something that's been really great because I can easily go back and jot something down on that paper calendar. I've been using it a lot this year, especially in my role where I'm planning a lot of like monthly workshops and get-togethers for teams and just writing them down in there. I really love that a lot, and it's something that I'm going to try my best to continue to do. The problem, like I just said, is that it works really well in a square notebook. I figured that out. I don't know that I can do that in an A5 notebook because there's just not enough space each month to do that. I'd have to set up multi-page. I don't want to think about it just because it would just stress me out too much. But I also love the experimentation of trying to figure it out.
Yeah, because I used a calendar view future log in an A5, but I had to turn the notebook to get it to sit nicely because usually you need to have like 5 or 6 rows and then 7 columns. Like that doesn't fit very nicely if you do it regular vertical style, but if you flip it and it's horizontal, you can get it to work. I personally found that the writing space was too small for me, but in the square though, it works really nicely in the square.
Did you just solve my problem for the B5? But no, I can't. Sorry, I'm using my marked notebooks that has page numbers in it, and I can't function if those aren't turned the right way. So we'll have to figure it out. But that is actually a really smart way to think about it. I didn't think about turning the page. Duh. That might solve my problem.
The other way that you can do it, which is it's a very big mind warp though, is making each week a column rather than each day. That one's really tricky. So it means that the first row is Monday, then the second row is Tuesday, then Wednesday. I've done that in my journal maybe twice, and both times that I've used it, it has completely mucked me up for the first 2 days at least until you get the hang of it. But it can be, yeah, an interesting solution because then you don't have to rotate your notebook because I'm not a fan of rotating my notebook. If I have to rotate my notebook, well, decorative wise, don't mind it. Actual functional wise, no, 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 no.
You'll have to show that to me afterwards because I'm interested to see like what that might look like because I got a lot of value out of this year. But like I said, I tried it in every size and square was the only one that felt right. So that'll be cool to see.
I'm actually surprised that you didn't just have like the five core bullet journal collections as your top five. Like I was fully prepared to rock up and Mark's just like simplicity is best. You must use an index or something like that.
I mean, I did think about it. I'm not going to lie to you. I was definitely thinking, like, Mark, when you finish this, this is just going to be the main ones. But no, I have some I little, fun little things, all functional but fun. All right, Jess, so you're number three. What's coming up as a must-have in that bullet journal of yours?
My number three, I call my future me problems list, which used to be called like a someday maybe list, but future me problems just sounds better. So this is effectively for any, I don't know, task, project, anything like that, that I think of while I'm going about my day, week. But I know I can't do it right now. Like I don't have the bandwidth, I don't have the time, effort, energy, resources, whatever. It's just not happening today, it's not happening this week, it's probably not happening this month. But because it doesn't have a set date attached to it, it doesn't go in the future log. It wouldn't be suitable there. It would just be kind of like kicking around in the bottom corner, like, hey, I exist, I'm here too. No. So instead, I have a dedicated space in my journal where all of those projects and tasks go so that I can do them at some point because I'm still curious about them, but I don't have to action them right now. I used to just have one of these per journal. So each journal that I'd set up, I would have a future me problems list or a someday maybe list or something like that. I think in one of them, I called it an LTP, like a long term projects list. But it kind of came to the realization that I did not want to migrate it with every new journal I was setting up. And because I use at least 2 everyday journals each year, that's a lot of tasks that you have to migrate each time. So instead, what I've done is I've put it in what I call my yearly collections journal. That's funnily enough one that holds yearly collections.
Wow.
I know. So every year at the end of the year, though, I can go and migrate those, move it into the new version of that list. It also just gives me an opportunity to check in and say, like, do these things actually matter anymore? Like, do you really need to reorganize your Spotify playlists? That one's been on my list since 2018. Like, it will still be there because I still want to do it. I just don't have the time for it.
Let me ask you this question about this, Jess. How often are you referring back to that? Because I've been thinking about this future me page along with your 101 list page as well. Do you build that into your review schedule is what I want to call it, but do you have certain points in the year where you mark that as like, don't forget to look back at this just to remind yourself, or are you just naturally looking at those pages anyway?
Yeah, I try and check in with it once a month, typically as part of like a kind of monthly reset. So as I migrate tasks forward in a month or, like close out one month, move into the next month, I do try and scan my eyes over that list and just see like, okay, well, is it your time to shine, friendo? Like, is this the month that I get this task done? Some of them do just kind of happen naturally. Like I know that some of the tasks I've had on there previously have been about like swatching pens or something. Get a new collection of pens, let it kick around at the bottom of my desk drawer or whatever for 3 months until I actually get around to swatching it. So then I'll come back to my future me problems list and without having to, I don't know, put any kind of mental effort into remembering that, it's just kind of happened by itself. So that's always kind of nice. Oh, little surprise. Yay me. Did a thing that I told myself I would do half a year ago. But I do try and check in with it, just not like super, super frequently because these are the kind of tasks that aren't really time pressured or really, really pressing in terms of like, I don't know, needs to be done by a certain date. Because if it has a deadline, it wouldn't go in there.
Gotcha. No, it makes sense. I'm just thinking about like how reminding myself to do that, I think would be the most important part. Otherwise, it would be lost upon me. But again, this is what we've talked about. These are collection pages that work for each of us in this time. Like, I don't know that I could necessarily do that because I know myself. I would lose it. or I'd never look at that page ever again. I'd have to remind myself to do it. But I love the idea though of this. It's kind of just like a collection of little thoughts. And I don't know if you ever get bored one day, you're like, oh, I said I was going to do this and do it and be like, yay, check something off. Dopamine hit. Next.
Exactly that. And I think it's the kind of thing that, like, sometimes it's just an inability to let go of something. Like, you'll have a task that you kind of keep kicking down the road in terms of like moving it from one daily to the next daily or one weekly to the next weekly. And so I'm giving myself that kind of like grace of saying, okay, you know that this is still important to you, or at least you feel it's still important to you. You're not ready to let it go yet. We'll move it into here so that you can have the separation of time. So when I come back and look at that at the end of the year, maybe now it's not as important. Maybe now I feel okay with letting it go. The Spotify playlists, I will never let go. I will do it eventually, just probably in like 2028.
You know what I do with that? I would never necessarily organize it. I would just put it on shuffle. And then if it was a song that I was like, oh, I can't stand it, I would just delete it from my playlist. So that's how I like self-edited it, right? I would just be like, oh, I can't stand to listen to this song, delete. Or if I heard it and instantly hit next and I was like, Mark, you just don't want to listen to that song anymore. Take it out of here. Like, it's just not it. But I love shuffle and it goes like way back. And you're like, yes, why did I stop listening to this song? It's so good.
Resurfacing the bangers, 100% that. The thing I have though is like, with my playlists, I set up a bunch of playlists that are like I have set up a bunch of playlists that are like the same thing. So I have, three variations of the same kind of like niche filling playlist. And so I really just need to go through and prune it. I say this like often. I really need to do this. I really need to do that. But future me problem. Ha ha ha.
Yeah, and that needs to go on your 101 list for next year. Like, I want you to accomplish that for yourself.
Yeah. We'll check back in this time next year. Did she actually get it done? Stay tuned. What would be your number two? All right. So, like, not the top, not quite the top, second most important collection or layout.
This was a hard one to pick between two and one, but my number two are my social media tracker pages. So these have been important to me since starting my Instagram account, which, as I've mentioned before, is starting my bullet journal journey as well. And so these started off very follower based and very Instagram focused. So as I was growing over time and paying a lot of attention to that, I would set up my trackers. I think my very first one was in increments of 50, and that took a really, really long time to figure out and to like top off. And I was like, okay. And then like the next one that I set up for was a little bit more aggressive. And it happened a bit faster. One time I decided to set up my Instagram tracker by thousands. So for every 1,000 of users, I would fill in the space for it. And I only filled in one square in the entire notebook. So I was like, okay, Mark, pull it back a little bit. So I usually do increments of 50 or 100. And, there are times like I had a very viral start to the beginning of this year. And so I set up that notebook and I had two videos that had over 1 million views on Reels. It was like a jet propulsion. And I think I actually filled out my Instagram tracker before the notebook even started. Like, that's how quick they went. And then I think I only just recently set up a new one because I was just like, oh, whatever, not a big deal. In the past, it was all Instagram focused. And then it was in my first Square notebook. I remember this because that's the first time that I really focused on growing my YouTube. So there was, 2 videos a week that I was doing. I was tracking to get to that 10,000 view hours or whatever it was to get into the program, right? Into that paid part of YouTube. And it was just so fun for me every month to track where that was going. And so from that time forward, I was always tracking two things. It was always tracking Instagram and tracking YouTube. Now it's not so much of a thing of like tracking for a specific goal or growth. I do give myself a goal, but I don't hold myself too hard to it. I'm not super upset if I don't hit that within the year, but I just love tracking that and seeing it go up, even if it's just small and incremental. I mean, as long as it's not going down, like I don't even know what I would do if at any point mine like went down significantly, right? If you're like, oh God, I'm not using that tracker anymore, just forget about it. And like I said, it's something that I enjoy doing. I think that if it gives you stress or anxiety, or you're really too overly focused on it, it makes you more upset than happy. This is definitely not a must have for you. But if you just like to keep track for the fun of it, or again, to see that incremental growth, that's why I really love it for myself.
I love your point about making sure that you pick the increment correctly, because I think that's for like any kind of tracker that people do. But for that one, it was like, oh, yep, that's cool. I've been on this high. I'm really getting going. I'm gonna set the goal here. And then it's like, neat, 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 neat.
It's just so funny because I know what it looks like in my head because I just remember going through the flip through and just seeing the one block filled in. And I really like that tracker too. It's what I wanted to fill out and just it never happening. It's just I got cocky one time, I just felt like this was it, and it was good, but it didn't happen for me. So now I'm much more realistic about it.
I love the idea of keeping track of those kind of things though, because like for any kind of goal that you can put that type of metric on, it can be really satisfying when however many months or years down the track and you go back and see it and you're like, oh, my little baby account was growing steadily and I was so happy. I remember doing like a giveaway for my first 300 Instagram followers. Like
Wow.
that was like a really big deal. I was like, oh my God, like have I made it? Am I famous now? Like, so cute. But it feels like a really big achievement, especially like, thinking about the kind of point of view you have at that time and the idea of like 300 people versus what you would have had however many months prior to that being like 10 or something. That is huge. That is a really big amount of growth. And then we look at it now and it's like, X thousand kind of a thing. You can kind of look back and be like, oh, but also like, stuff it. She was excited. It's all good.
All right, Jess, number two for you.
Number two, so it's kind of related, I suppose, more so in terms of the like working towards some kind of a goal with your YouTubing. So my number two would have to be project plans, and I'm keeping this kind of vague because it's not like for one particular type of project or anything like that, but anything that has like a multiple series of steps to take action on in order to get to an endpoint, those are essential. And I usually have a fairly typical format depending on what kind of project it is. Like if this is the kind of project which has a series of elements that each have a series of steps that are the same, then it's usually in a kind of Alistair method, set up like a grid type structure. If it's more of a project where it's just like a whole bunch of one-off actions, then really it's just a fancy list. Like that's a really nice way to put it. But having those kind of layouts in my journal I've found to be very enjoyable, just to keep all of the ideas for the project in general in one spot, whether that be kind of like a more traditional project like a, I don't know, office organization project, or something that's more kind of like goal based that doesn't have that very concrete outcome. Like either of those, I find that having layouts for those in my journal is pretty essential. Like I could put those things on daily logs and weekly logs and whatever else, but having them all together just makes it so much easier to find where you're up to, like where did I leave off, what's coming next, all of that kind of stuff. For some of them, I also like to put in kind of like, I'm going to say a timeline. It's not really a timeline. It's more like a roadmap, I guess is probably a better word for it, because there doesn't really have like specific time restraints set to it. But like it shows you the series of steps that you're needing to take. So you can very clearly see, like, okay, I am up to here. This is next. I find those to be really useful.
Yeah, I actually have a similar one that I've used before just for regular project or program management and that I've created, and it is really great. And part of my method to my process in there is also setting up kind of a Gantt chart, right? Which is exactly step by step and timeline for what you want to do with those. And even if they move, I think it's just helpful, again, if it doesn't have specific dates, to have something to work towards is actually something I tell my team all the time because what we're talking about here right now is actually what my job is. And I'm like, okay, what are we looking for? What are the phases of this project and figuring those out and then trying to time box those or put time to those to create a light schedule. And they're like, well, I don't know the exact due date. I'm like, cool. Do you know the week or the month that it's even going to happen, right? It doesn't have to be down to the day. You can even do it month by month and kind of give yourself that range. I think it's a fantastic one. It's funny, I almost put this as my number two as well. But I was like, no, like I use this one more than that necessarily. But any specific things that you capture in yours for others that might think this is a good idea for them that you're like, yeah, this has to at least be in here for me to make this a super functional project page?
If the project page is more goal oriented, then usually one of the things I like have to put in there would be metrics of success, or effectively like little milestones that I want to hit in working towards it, mainly so that it makes the progress that you're making super visible for yourself, especially on those types of goals where it feels like a slog. Like you kind of just get into the weeds of it and it's just the same thing day in, day out. And doing those reps doesn't feel as exciting when you get to like day 7 or whatever. So it's like maybe I could have a metric that's like, did 7 days in a row, or like, tried something new in whatever space. Obviously, it's very goal dependent. If we think about it in terms of, I don't know, like an exercise goal or whatever, then it's like, yeah, 7 days in a row did my exercise or tried a new style of exercise. So those kind of things in there, those metrics of success, that's really important. The other one is just having the actions list broken down in terms of like how frequent things need to be done. Because for some goals, it's going to be very much like every day you do XYZ, or every week you do XYZ. Whereas other goals, it's a lot more just like individual one off steps. So being very clear on how often things need to be done, that's very important when it comes to setting up my project plans.
I like that a lot. Yeah, mine are a little bit more like kind of like work project based. The only thing I would maybe add, again, this is going to be very dependent on the type of projects you do. And if you are collaborating with others, is what I like to add is like, who are those people and like, what are their roles for that project? Even if it's something basic, if I'm thinking about like, say you're working on like a small project and you're the designer and the person is the writer. It's just like, okay, this is what they're doing as a part of this. This is what I'm doing. Or even a larger group, the project manager, your subject matter experts. Like those are important things to like add in there too. I love your breakdown though of the tasks because I think that's a really big thing that people forget about. It's actually my current project at work right now is breaking down the phases into smaller bits, almost like the Lego pieces is how I'm referring to them. Like, what are the Lego pieces that you're putting together to create that phase of it? And I loved your idea before about like sometimes it's just we call them like brain dumps or and things like that too, but like feel free to use those pages to be messy in before you kind of put it somewhere else, even before you take it from an analog to a digital space. Like I find that writing it all out and circling it, highlighting, color coding, whatever you might do is a super functional way too with those pages. It doesn't have to be like a picture perfect page. Like work on their pages. That's kind of the whole idea here, you know?
Yeah, I found that because I would get a little bit precious about putting my goal plans into my bullet journal, because I do like it when my bullet journal looks nice. That's part of the joy, right? My journal. I like it to be, fulfilling in that space. But when it came to goals, I wanted to be more messy. I wanted to be able to do mind maps or like brainstorms and stuff like that that didn't have to be super neat. So I actually put those into a separate journal so that then I
Oh,
didn't
wow.
feel restricted in that way. I thought it was just going to be easier and like give myself kind of permission to, it's going to sound really dumb, but like use my handwriting because I don't consider the lettering that I do in my bullet journal to be my handwriting. Like I write in all caps in there because it looks neater and because like everything's kind of uniformly sized and thus it just like cheerleader effect. It looks nicer. Whereas my everyday regular handwriting, I don't use that in that journal. I do in my goals journal though, where I can be a little bit more messy.
How do you switch? I mean, when I switched from writing like regular sentence case to all caps, because I gave myself permission to do that when I started my bullet journal, at first it was hard, but I can't go back. Like I've tried to write a regular sentence. So even like when I fill out my cards for people's birthdays, it's just all in caps. That's my handwriting. So I don't know how you're like code switching. That's what I'm going to call it. Because that's like a whole other side of your brain. I'd be like, how do you write a little A again and a little N?
Whereas you open a card from Marcus, you're like, "Happy birthday!" He's like yelling at you.
It definitely is.
Yeah, I think it's like because I have that kind of clear distinction in my mind that like this journal gets all caps, this journal doesn't, it's not so bad. Also, if I'm writing like a messy note or something in my scribble book, that one I'll usually just use my everyday handwriting for, which the reason that I don't use my everyday handwriting in my journal is because it has a tendency to change, I guess, in terms of like how it looks, depending on how fast I'm writing or if I'm writing italicized versus straight up and down, whereas my capitals always look the same. I do not italicize capitals unless I'm like actively trying to. So it means that I can get a much more cohesive and consistent look throughout my journal by using them. And again, I like it when my journal looks nice. So if I use that in there, it's more likely to look nice. It's just a little bit easier to keep it looking pretty.
I mean, I love it because it just shows like how different people use that because I mean, I can definitely say like early on, it was very much about having like your journal trying to be like pristine and very nice and all of that pieces there, which I just threw out the window at some point. I had an epiphany and I was like, Mark, use it. It does not matter if you can't fit a whole year in one. Like, it's okay. And it kind of changed my mind on it. But I like the way that you're talking about this here, though. Again, not that I would necessarily do it, but in my mind, it's almost like having a draft in another notebook to be able to then come over and bring it into where like the final idea or the final thing lives.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I think about it. It's probably like writing a paper. You write it out in bullets and little notes, and then you bring it over to the computer when you're ready to write out the whole thing. Like that's kind of how my brain is thinking, but it makes sense, I think, for it, because then you don't just have like scribbly pages inside of your project notebook, which is supposed to be about like the most important things, the main goals you're trying to hit, and then watching that progress. It's like two different brain spaces, so I get it.
Yeah, it's kind of how I treat it. Like the goal notebook or like the goals journal, that's for the ideation, the brainstorming, working out the kinks, nuts and bolts, all of that kind of thing. Once I have my list of stuff that needs to be done in order to accomplish something, those get moved over into my bullet journal. So each month or each cycle that I set up, I've got an actions list where I pull from the goals journal into there. So I just have the ones that are happening this month. It just makes it a little bit easier because then you're not like looking at an entire huge laundry list of things to do for a goal, especially if the goal is going to take you like 6 months to do. You don't need to see every single step. You just need to see the ones that are relevant for the here and now. So I effectively like siphon those off and put them into my everyday journal, one that looks a little bit nicer, so that then I can just focus on those, get those done in the time that I have at that current moment.
I like. I'm thinking, but it's reminding me a bit of a few of the journals I've seen out there based around work. Like Bear and Fig has like their Do Work journal, and some other journals recently I've seen, and they've always been geared towards men. Like Bear and Fig has another like men's journal, and there is the Mind journal, and other ones like that too. I always say like while they're geared towards guys, it really is for anyone. But the common theme I see through a lot of them is the idea of breaking down a goal. They're all asking you for a quarter, what's your main focus? Okay, break down those big goals into milestones and then break those milestones down into actionable tasks. So it's exactly the same thing that you're saying. But for anyone who's like, I don't know how to structure that, well, first check out Jess's videos because that's where it's at, all the information. But that there are also other journals out there too that are kind of based around that. I actually just asked Bear and Fig if they would be open to sending me their Do Work journal because I did a video on them 3 years ago, and I was like, I'm really curious how I would use it because I did use it. I think I gave it to a friend to check out to see like if she would like it, and I don't think I got it back from her. But I was like, I want to get my hands on this again because I did like how it broke it down. Because for me, it's helpful to have something do that, even though I know the process. But I really love that idea of working out the kinks somewhere else, but then bringing the updated pieces into that final space. That's neat.
Yeah, I think that's also kind of what I do with my R&D notebooks sometimes. So R&D being like research and development, and primarily they do get used for like idea videos on the channel. I set up like a bunch of layouts and flip through them and whatever. And because they're not ones that I'm going to use, I put them in a separate notebook so that they don't clutter up my everyday tasks and such. But every so often I do trial layouts in there so I can kind of see how the spacing works. Like, do I think that realistically I would use this based on how much space it actually takes up or whatever, and then move them over into my notebook. Also very helpful when you're trying out like artistic styles that you're not super familiar with and you just want to see if the execution of it's actually going to look good enough to bring into your notebook before you go and slap a whole bunch of stuff down on the page and go, oh, I hate that, yuck.
And if you don't have separate notebooks, I mean, that was a big game changer for me is when I did the same thing. I actually had a dedicated notebook for all of that other stuff because especially when you're creating content or thinking up idea, if you have a daily journal, you're like, I don't want to mess this up to like figure out an idea. I had some of my older notebooks when I was talking before about my calendar future log and I was trying to figure out the spacing. Instead of grabbing a brand new notebook to do that in, I had 3 or 4 pages left over in an A5 and a B5 and a square notebook that I used previously. So I also just went back to those to try it out too. That is something else. If you have extra pages in your notebooks too, a great way to like think about it ahead before you bring it in. It makes sense when you do it. I know not everyone necessarily has the ability to do that, right? Or maybe the budget to be able to do that. But I do think that even if you have a really cheap notebook. I mean, we all have those notebooks probably that sit on the shelves that we're like, I hated using this. This was crap. Like, never again. Like, pop that baby out and make it into an R&D notebook. It's the best thing you could ever do. And it's using something that, your partner was mad at you for buying that you didn't use, and now you can say you used it. And now you need more.
And if you still feel like super antsy about it, you're like, oh god, I couldn't possibly, my poor precious baby notebook. You can just do it in like Google Sheets or Excel. Like you just set yourself up a grid that has the right number of boxes across and down, and then merge boxes, fill it in with color, whatever you need to do, just to kind of like get your bearings. But alrighty, it's time. Mark, what is your number one, most essential, the one that you must have?
I love this so much because when I looked at the list before I even saw your answers, after I wrote down mine, I audibly laughed out loud because I was like, yeah, because this is just what we use all the time. So for me, my number one must have is a weekly log. This is not a hard thing to think about because I use a weekly log every single week. It's just been something from the very beginning of my bullet journal journey that I quickly realized that daily logs were not necessarily for me because I use my bullet journal for work and I really like that weekly view. And I do a bit of daily logging in there. I'm still rapid logging for what's happening, but I love a weekly overview. And it's kind of a two-parter why I love it. I mean, definitely for me, I like it. Like I said, I like to look ahead. If I have specific dates that things are due, I can write them in my calendar ahead of time. I don't have to like hold it in my brain or write it down in my daily to remember to get it done that day. And that for me was just something that never really stuck with the original daily log method, I guess I'll call it, right? Like it just didn't quite work out with the bullet journal, like Bible way of doing it. So I was like, all right, weeklies are it, right? And it worked out well. And then the other reason I love the weekly too is that creative side of things. So I have, a bazillion different ideas and weeklies I've tried throughout the years. Depending on the notebook, I kind of fall into some of these like templated ways to go about it. But what I love about it is like setting up the foundation for those, but then adding the creativity over top of it, leaving room for stamps or stickers or whatever else I might want to use, right? I just find them to be very functional for what I need to do in my day to day slash week to week. And it also is just very fulfilling to be able to change it up every week, a different style, a different material, a different approach, reflect on how I set up last week and see whether or not it worked out for me, and then slightly change it over time. It's very like agile methodology in my brain on how I approach it. I've tried different ways. I've tried to go back to dailies. In my social media like desk journal that I set up, I was like, oh, Mark, you're just going to do daily logging inside of there. And it is not working out too well for me, Jess. I'm finding that I'm just not using it like that much, like something about it's just not quite clicking for me, how I thought it was going to when I got started inside of it. I was like, Mark, just set up a weekly because like this is exactly why it works for you in this other one. But those are really my big reasons for it.
I think that that's like the best part about like doing weekly logs was that ability to change things up, and that's something that I really loved about weeklies as well. Getting that kind of reflective process at the end of the week, setting up for the new one of like, okay, well, which sections did I utilize fully? Which ones didn't get utilized as well? Is this something I need to tweak or change, or is it something I maybe need to retire for now, bring back later, try it again later? Like maybe it's not the right season for having a waterlog or something like that. It's never the right season for a waterlog.
No.
But in terms of your weeklies, though, because you obviously do try a lot of styles, are there any in particular, like either the bare bones of it or general structures that you kind of come back to time and time again?
Yeah, so there's two. I think for me, it falls into a vertical layout, which essentially is just breaking your day up into those long verticals. It's super flexible because if you're using a full page, whether it's inside of an A5 or a square, you can set that up and you can do 5 or 6 days with a split for the Saturday, Sunday during the week, whatever you want to do with that. And what I love about the verticals is that it essentially just gives you that top header area to add a stamp to it or do some type of stencil work or whatever creatively inside of there for the top of your page. And then the rest of the page for me then becomes the functional notes, tasks, whatever's happening. And I love that it's kind of like contained to a day. And then the other is the horizontal version of it, which essentially is like a full page spread, 2 pages. The left hand side becomes focused on that Monday through Friday or weekly overview, and then you start to use the rest of your page as kind of the daily log type approach to it, right? And just rapid logging. So that's why I say I like to mix them up, but it really comes into that. And then you pick and choose again, like how much space you want. The weeks when I have a lot of notes and I know there's a lot of meetings that are coming up that I'm going to need a lot of that space, I can really shrink a horizontal down to just be like, maybe 10 squares on the left hand side of my page for that, and then the rest is for everything else, or use one whole page for a weekly overview and then use the other for notes and tasks. Like you can be super flexible inside of that. So those are it's pretty basic. It's, 5 days during the week. I just realized that I'm just not using weekends. Sometimes I'll put them in there and I'm like, meh, whatever. And sometimes I don't. But, having that is just a really great way to go about it. And especially if I'm like, wasn't on top of my game and I'm just like, oh crap, I have a meeting in 10 minutes. I already know what that layout looks like. I can just look at a previous week and be like, oh, that's 10 squares with one in between going down the page, and I'm good to go, and then start taking my notes. I find that when I got a little bit more complicated with those, you had to work ahead a little bit more. You couldn't easily just kind of roll into it. And then I think everything else, I like to think about more modularly, right? I like to be like, this week I've been listening to a lot of different types of music. So I'm going to add a little like daily song module. And then, oh, well, I'm really interested in working out or a water log for now. And I can pop this into the space and think about it from a module standpoint to kind of build it in. But I always know that my weekly overview, whether it's vertical or horizontal, it kind of keeps to that space, and then everything else just flows depending what I want.
I found that in trying different weekly styles and stuff like that, changing out modules, kind of like you said, the ones that are a bit more staple for me were the ones that were kind of like summarizing events, whereas everything else was like whatever I feel like at the time. So, like, maybe I'll bring in meals, maybe I'll bring in gratitude or media that you're kind of checking out or getting into, like a little section about currently watching, reading, like enjoying or whatever. I find that those modules in particular, I wouldn't play around with them very often, but it's always nice to look back on them and see like what was Jess doing? Like what was she up to?
That's why I love like the little music modules. Like when I was going through some of my notebooks recently, I'm always like, God, that was such a fun idea. And again, you're going back and you're like, I totally forgot about this song. Like, and you put it on, your playlist or bring it up and you're like, yeah, this was great. Or what the hell were you listening to, Mark? And why was this the thing? And I always think to myself, like, you should do this more often, Mark. I could do that inside of Hobonichi, 5-year journal, but I have those on my desk and I just don't ever think to be like, fill that out today, Mark. But maybe a weekly thing could be it. I don't know. But I do. I love the idea of like making it what you need it for when you need it versus feeling like you have to do it every single week. Like at that point, if it's the same every week, I might as well just go into a pre-printed planner. Like why recreate the same thing every week? But that's just me.
Yeah, but then you don't get to have the opportunity for the experimentation. It's one of those things like you're like, oh, I've been using the same layout for like 4 weeks in a row now. Maybe I could do a pre-printed planner. And then on the fifth week, you're like, hate this layout. It's freaking boring. I want something different.
So that's the problem is that every time that Arch and Olive comes out with like their undated planners, I'm like, Mark, this is pretty much what you do. You just put stickers or stamps or something over top of it. Like you're not really, veering too far from this. But then just the thought of using the same weekly view every single week, I'm already bored and I haven't even taken that notebook out of the packaging yet.
Yeah, no, completely understand. I literally just got one as part of their professional release, and I already know that it's literally just going to be a shelf trophy for the rest of forever because it's a beautiful notebook, but I'm not going to use it. I don't even know if it's visible from here. It's over in the corner somewhere, lurking, looking super cute, but again, it won't be touched.
All right, so we had my number one, which I know is very close to your number one, like I said. So what's your number one most used page that you have to have in your bullet journals?
I thought it was so funny reading your one because, like, legit, if you had have asked me a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, very much when I first started journaling for sure, weekly would have been it. Like, I have to have it. This is how I organize my life. This is how my brain works. And over the last year and a half or so, I've just converted to dailies. Like, completely do not understand how this happened, but now it is my staple, my go-to, and I get so much joy and fulfillment filling out my little daily log and seeing all the tasks written down. I do think though that one of the things that people get hung up on with daily logs is that idea of like, well, what if I have a task for Thursday and it's currently Tuesday? Like, where does that go? Because that was something that really held me back for a long time in terms of daily logging. I was very much of that mind of like, I don't want to keep Thursday's tasks rattling around in my brain because then when it gets to Thursday, I won't have remembered them and they won't get done. So where would they go? And the weekly was the solution for that. Nowadays, I don't know if it's just because I don't have as many tasks that like have to happen on
Mm.
certain days of the week, and that's maybe the solution because I've gone from being in like, the teaching profession where you have your Monday to Friday kind of a thing to working for myself, so things happen when I make them happen. Like maybe that's the change. But I've found that I don't necessarily need that daily structure, or rather the weekly structure of each days, and being able to put tasks on specific days quite as much as I used to. For any of those tasks that I feel like they do have to happen on a specific day, they're either one, completely like routine, so it's like laundry happens on Thursdays, that one I don't have to worry about. Monday is live streaming day. Friday is thinking about the live stream that's going to happen on Monday and probably setting it up, but probably not, it's going to happen on Saturday. Those kind of things. But everything else, it's like if it needs to happen on a set day of the week for any one week in particular, I've just given myself the permission to chuck that on my monthly log. It has taken me so many years to be able to do that because in my mind, the monthly log was only for events. Like you wouldn't put tasks on the monthly log, but then I didn't even use my monthly log, so it was kind of just pointless. It was one of those weird collections where I'd set it up each month and then not use it, and then the one month I wouldn't set it up, I'd be like, "Where are you? I miss you. Where are you?" Like it would make me so upset not having it there.
Love that Blink reference.
Oh my gosh, I've been saying it so frequently recently. It's problematic.
I actually have the T-shirt on that says "What are you?"
But like in Australian or
Oh, I wish there was a little button I could press that it could say it in Jess's accent. That would be great.
I like the one that's got like the like don't waste your time on me, but it's all like really exaggerated all of the vowels and it looks like a jumbled mess. I want that shirt.
Oh, it's my favorite. Blink is my absolute favorite band. I know we're not talking about that, but that absolute favorite.
I obviously need to set up another playlist for them because like I feel like I need one now. They're probably in every single playlist I already have, but that's fine. We can have another one.
I was actually, why are we on this side tangent right now? Again, I was thinking the other day, I was listening to a song. Actually, it's a Chapel Roan song. And there's a TikToker that's like this punk pop kind of band. And they covered the Chapel Roan song. And I was like, I think I like this version more than I like this version of the song. When I hear her version of it, I'm like, okay, fine. Like, why don't I get as excited about this? And then I hear this like punk version of it, and I was like, this is what the song should have been.
You need to go and look up the like punk goes whatever. So it's like punk goes pop or like pop goes punk or whatever. They've got albums. Rock goes punk or like a hip hop as well because you've got like Oasis's Wonderwall. That one sounds great with the remix. You've got Disturbia, you've got like Super Bass. I'm thinking of all the ones that we used to listen to heaps. Free Falling, I think was another one that was really good. Yeah, just heaps of them. Excellent.
Oh, the entire series are all of my favorites.
Now I feel like that's going to be another playlist to make is all of the like remix covers and all of that. Like, where's my list? I need to write this down.
We absolutely do. Now that we've gone on this total side tangent of things, Planner Pals, we definitely want to hear from you as a part of this. First of all, let us know if there's any great songs that we need to know about to add to our playlist. We want to hear from you. Let us know what are your must-have collection pages in your bullet journal or your planners. What are the go-tos? You can drop those in the comment section if you're watching us here on YouTube, or if you'd like, hit us up over on Instagram, the Planner Pals Podcast. And you can always email us, plannerpalspodcast@gmail.com. Let us know your favorites as well.
I'm eager to read about people's favorites. I'm also eager to get more song recommendations for the Spotify playlist project that will never be completed. But in our next episode, though, we're going to have a look at the reverse. So this time was very much about the collections that we cannot do without, the ones that very much have to be part of our new setups, lineups, all of that kind of thing. Next time, we're going to look at the ones that continually flop. We try and we try and we try and it just doesn't work out. And I'm eager to see what those are for you. I already have some of them in mind, but I'm gonna have to go and take a trip down memory lane and look through some of my journals, relive the trauma of the number of trackers I've set up that just didn't work out. Oh.
We're going to have a lot of common ones, I think. I think all of us in this planner community, we've got that one that we really thought we were going to hold on to.
I'm looking forward to that one. It'll be very interesting to see what we have in terms of those. But for now, thank you, Planner Pals, for watching.